Okay, so the great news is that I won't spend long on the slides because Ronnie's already talked about a lot of the stuff that I was going to talk about. I knew that was going to happen because of the structure of the session, so I'll be able to spend more time in the actual system looking at the functionality. This you already know. One of the reasons that badges became something that came to the attention of Blackboard was because of these drivers that are coming from the student body, that they want their education to be flexible so that they have different options to take different pieces of education from different learning providers. We see this happening more and more as the provision possibilities expand. They want it to be relevant, so don't teach me something abstract, teach me how I can use it in the real world and make it relevant. They want it to be meaningful, not just to them as learners, but also to other people. So when they present their accreditations, it's something that is, they're talking the same language as employers and as future university and college application services are speaking. And they want it to be good value. So there's a lot of different options available for educators. This is very similar to the graphic that Ron's just shown you. And this is kind of pinched from Doug Belshaw's blog, with apologies. But something that really shows the kind of visual of what I've just been talking about. We anticipate at Blackboard in the future that students are going to come into education, if they come into traditional education at all, from a lot of different points and with a lot of different prior learning, some of it accredited, some of it not. And it's really about how do we then manage to make that person achieve their own goals, put together something that's going to be transferable, that's going to mean something to employers, to future applications and to their careers at the long term. So in terms of education broadly, this opens up a lot of different opportunities. This means that we can accredit all kinds of different things. It means that we can create degrees and certificates as a kind of amalgamation of different types of accreditation. So rather than just doing credits in the traditional university sense, you might do some credits that have some accreditation that comes from some badges that you've earned from somewhere else. You might also be thinking about ways to demonstrate competency for pieces of a module that aren't part of a final assessment. For example, if you think about that astronomy module that I was showing you in the previous demonstration, there might be pieces of that study that are going to be relevant to the students when they're trying to prove their competency that aren't necessarily proved by the final exam that they take that say, great, you've got a basic understanding of physics. We'll come more to that in a second. So this diagram gives you a kind of an overview of the badges ecosystem. Now there are some really, really important pieces in this puzzle that I'm obviously not going to have time to cover today, but the things to bear in mind is that badges have to be kind of validated in the same way that courses and assessments are validated now, for them to have meaning, for them to be a common currency translatable between providers and suppliers. So if I, as a learning provider, choose to set up a badge scheme for a particular qualification, I need to be able to say, okay, these are the things that we're assessing, and these are the badges that we're producing as a result of it, and they have to be meaningful competencies. They then have to be verified. There has to be an assessment process whereby you can establish that the learner or the individual actually demonstrates those competencies and has earned that badge. It's not something that they just kind of cobble together from Photoshop and stuff on their website. So the Mozilla badge system allows you to do this with things like metadata, endorsements, and so on. And there also has to be an authentication from the employer side to say, okay, we recognise the value of this badge that the student is presenting to us. And there's also endorsement options in the badge ecosystem that will allow employers to endorse badges and say, we accept this as proof. The piece that I'm going to focus on today is this learning providers piece here. And the question is how badges fit in traditional education. So the badge conversation is huge, and the possibilities are huge. But really from a Blackboard point of view, we're starting from the kind of the core base of our customers, which is mostly universities and colleges who are delivering what we consider to be traditional education. What can badges add or bring to that conversation? The first thing is assessment and accreditation. There's no reason why a university or college can't use badges as an extra optional form of assessment, form of accreditation of assessed activity or demonstrated competence. The second one is incentivisation. Ronnie spoke a little bit about this earlier. For engagement, for motivation, for retention. Now, this seems like something that I was having some conversations this morning with a chap from another institution who was saying that the challenge around badges is almost because of the name badge, there is a risk of it becoming trivialised in the eyes of people who are not familiar with the system. It's a badge. You know, it's not the same as a certificate. We have an idea of what we think a certificate is as part of formal education. We have an idea of what we think a badge is. And those two things are not necessarily equal in our hierarchy of assessment value. But from a motivation point of view, there are a lot of things you need to think about in terms of the pedagogy. And this is where the complexity of the badge system can really come into its own. It needs some careful thought, it needs some careful planning. Think about things like when you're putting a badge in your course, if you're doing it for motivation, are you going to put that up as something that's understood in advance? Are you going to make it available to your students so they can see the criteria, they know what they need to work towards, and it's a motivational tool in the sense that they can aspire to it? Or are you going to keep it hidden and just give it as a reward, as a kind of surprising, delightful event for a high achieving student that's also motivational but in a very, very different way? When we talk about motivation, are we talking about social acceptance? Are we talking about formal acceptance? If you're creating a badge for motivation, are you creating it in a kind of a peer competition environment? Or are you creating it as something that they might want to take out into their Mozilla backpack and reuse as evidence of actual skills? And those things will that decision will influence things like the kind of metadata and the description that you put into the badge. Are we talking about extrinsic or are we talking about intrinsic motivation? The extrinsic motivation obviously being things like peer pressure and social competition, social recognition, but also things like allowing peers to contribute to the allocation and awarding of badges. Are you going to allow, for example, to collect data from students just to nominate people to get badges? Or is it simply intrinsic in the sense that an individual student has a level of achievement in a genuine kind of gamification sense and wants to kind of level up to the next level, and that becomes a motivator for them to improve their individual learning? So I wanted to kind of just stretch out this motivation concept because I think there's a lot more to it than people realise. And I've picked some of this from this URL down here, Carla Vasily from the Mozilla Foundation. And I would really recommend that you have a look at her blog because this piece here is taken from her philosophical ideas about badges. And there are, I think, 7 other pieces of the puzzle that go with this as well. So you can see that there's a lot of complexity behind this system, and it can have a lot of kind of deep and considered meaning. Carrot versus stick was the last one I forgot to mention. So the idea there would be, is it something that's going to be regarded as a nice to have or something that's a requirement for progression? And also, is it something that's directing users in a particular direction? If it's required to have, you're effectively staging the path that learner is going to take. Or if it's nice to have, you might be actually allowing the learner to choose their own path and say, I want to do this piece, I want to get that badge, I want to get that badge, but not necessarily following a formal accreditation path. Both of those options are possible with badges. So how does it work? Let's get out of the slides and get into the system. As always with nods to the gods of live demos. Oh. Hang on, I'm not connected, bear with me.
For some reason.
Oh, that's my own fault. Took it out. Sorry. Thank you. Okay, so to start with, I'm going to log in as an instructor and just show you the process of creating a badge. So obviously, once you've thought about, what kind of badge system you want to use and how you're going to present your badges to your students, you want to think about how to create them in the system. We're there. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go back into that same course, Introduction to Astronomy. And what I've done in here is I've created a series of badges, and some of them are some of these are what you would consider to be assessment-based badges, things that a student might use outside of the context of the Blackboard course, and some of them are motivational badges. And if I just show you what I've done so far. So I'm logged in as an instructor. I'm going into the course tools and achievements. The achievements and badges tool in Blackboard has two options. You can create badges or you can create certificates. In this case, obviously, I've chosen to use badges. So what I've done here is I've created a set of badges which have criteria that the students need to complete in order to earn these badges. Now, you can, if you want to, in Blackboard, just create a badge and just give it to people. It doesn't have to be automated, it doesn't have to be based on any kind of grade that they've achieved or the fact that they've submitted an assignment or anything like that. You can just nominate people for badges or groups for badges based on achievements in the classroom, for example, or on nominations from their peers. In this case, what I've done is I've set up some criteria so that the system will give the badge automatically if the student meets those criteria. So, for example, I could say I want my student to be able to have reviewed some content. I want them to have scored a particular grade in an assessment. I want them to have contributed to a discussion, whatever it might be. And once the student has met all of those criteria, they will actually be awarded the badge by Blackboard, and they'll get a little notification to say, "Congratulations, you've earned a badge." So each of these has different criteria, and you can see on the right-hand side here that I as a tutor have a list of the students who have actually earned that badge. So I can see that Stephen Fry's got it, Norma June Brainbrook has got it. They're my two top students. Congratulations to them, they're telescope technicians. So, just to show you how that works in terms of creation, just go and edit one that I've got already. Now, what you'll see here is a form type interface that is probably quite familiar to most people who've used Blackboard. You have a location in the course where that achievement is going to appear, so you might want to link it in and put it in context with some other resources. You also have a description. Now this, I've actually done quite a lightweight description for this, but this is where you might want to think about if the student is planning to export this badge and use it in a wider context, you might want to provide some more detail here, because the context that you're using in your course is not necessarily transferable and is not going to have a meaning to an employer or a completely different university. So you might have to be careful about the level of detail you use here. The next page allows me to define triggers. So on this page I can say, okay, I want it to release on a particular date, I want to allocate it to people or groups. If I scroll down a bit, I want it to be conditional on achievement of a particular grade for an activity. And in here I'll have all of the items that are in my grade centre for the course. And I can choose one or more of those, specify the score that I want the student to achieve. So you can see here, I've created a column for in the grade centre for this activity or assessment of telescopes, and the student has to score more than 90 out of 100 on that assessment to be awarded this badge. And then down at the bottom here, you can see that in addition to that, they also have to review these pieces of content within the course and confirm that they've read them. And then the last piece of the puzzle from an instructor point of view is selecting the actual reward that's allocated to the student once they've fulfilled that criteria. So, bear with me. Okay, and for exactly this reason, I put some screenshot slides in, because sometimes you just never know when the internet is not going to be your friend. So let's get back to this. So creating badges, we've already had a little look at how that works. You can see that you can have a list of the badges that are in your course and also the recipients that they've been allocated to. Now, when a student goes into the course, you have two options, like I said before. You can actually make that badge available in advance and show them what they need to achieve to get it. Or you can actually just award them on a kind of much more ad hoc basis. So for this student, he's gone in to have a look at this badge and he can see that particular activities need to meet he needs to meet the criteria for particular activities. Now, because this is a demo course, it's not referring to specific assignments. But in there it would tell him, okay, assignment 1, test 2, these are the criteria that you need to get to. From a student point of view, they have an achievements page. When they get a notification from the system to say that they've got an achievement, they can go and have a look at this page. It will tell them the ones that they've earned, and also if you've made those available, the ones that are still available for them to earn. And from this page, they have some options. They can look at the detail of the badge, which is basically how it will appear in the backpack with all of the metadata and description and so on. And they can also, from here, if you've allowed it as an institution, export to Mozilla. So let me just try the system one more time and see if I can show you those last pieces. I think we've still got a couple of minutes. Okay, I tell you what, let me log out and show you the student view and get the idea. So my student is going to log in. And he's going to go back into the same astronomy course that we've just been looking at. And he wants to know which badges are available to him. And you can either find these in the actual content area that are in context with the materials that they're related to, or you can go into tools, go to achievements, and you'll see here, this is his page, Reggie. He's already earned this badge, which is the Star Search badge, because he can identify and map constellations. But he really wants that telescope technician badge because that's the one that's going to get him the placement over the summer that's going to make a difference to his work experience and his CV. So he's going to go in here and he's going to have a look at the badge. This is the screen that represents how that badge appears in the backpack. And this is the screen that tells him what he needs to do. So you can see here, he's done the test and he got the right grade, so that's fine. He's looked at the celestial sphere information, but he hasn't yet reviewed the other 2 pieces of content that are required for him to get this badge. So he can now go into the content area, mark those things as reviewed. There's one of them. Obviously, he would pay a lot more attention to the content that's in here than I'm doing for the sake of argument right now. Having absorbed all that information in great detail, he's reviewed them, and now you can see he's got a little pop-up here that says you earned a new achievement, and the achievement has appeared in the context area. So that's actually automated the delivery of that badge or prize for him for having completed those activities. So that's the kind of the textual functionality side. Now I just wanted to raise a couple more suggestions, I guess. So we talked a little bit about motivation, we talked a bit about reusable accreditation for competency assessment and so on. Gordon's mentioned a little bit about documenting extracurricular skills, so things like the HERE report, finding a way to make that A, more transferable and flexible, and B, not something that's locked at graduation. So when the student leaves the institution, they can take with them the badges that they've earned in Blackboard and add them to an ongoing lifelong learning backpack that represents them as a learner in 20 years or 30 years down the line. Obviously the technology evolves, but the principle needs to be in place that that's a possibility. Entry requirements. What about looking at things like A-level scores, but also having some alternative measures of capability and competence when you're looking at admissions processes and allowing students into the university. We know that these learners are going to be learning from a whole range of sources, so are we going to start accepting some of those in our formal assessment processes as institutions? I think probably that's a little way down the line, but it's worth thinking about. Endorsing badges. I spent some time at University of Northampton before it was university, and the degrees there were validated by the University of Leicester. There's no reason why badges can't be done in the same way. As an institution, you might want to endorse a badge that's provided by a completely different learning provider, and that might be a college, or it might be just an individual, it might be a trainer, it might be something as informal as that. But as an institution, you have an opportunity to validate the assessment process and say, yes, I'm happy with the quality that represents, and add your endorsement to that badge. So the message, I guess, is that as far as traditional assessment goes, it's not an either or, it's a both and. So you could have awards both from traditional assessment, from traditional universities, and badges, but you could also have badges as part of your traditional education process, something that's embedded in your university or college life. And also not just for students. So a lot of the kind of use cases that I've mentioned here have been around students, but I know some of our clients are using badges as a way of recognising really good online course design, for example, among staff, and giving that member of staff a badge to say, this is a great Blackboard course, well done. Or you have a really great teaching skill in this area, well done. They could be accreditations for CPD and so on as well. So, in terms of getting started, how am I doing for time? 2 minutes. In terms of getting started, most people, I think, with this kind of thing are much more comfortable starting at the individual course level. So looking at activity badges or competency badges, giving badges for either achievement or for exceptional contribution to the course. It might be that they're a really good person at kickstarting discussion, for example, or at peer mentoring and support and things like that. At an institution level, now the next kind of scale up of this will depend a little bit on institutional policy, because the badges obviously come with some metadata about who's issued them. So you might want to check with your institution whether it's okay to say issued by the university or college of. If not, then you could issue them from yourself as an individual. If I were a professor of physics, for example, there's nothing wrong with saying this badge was issued by Julie Usher, Professor of Physics at University of X. That's not the same thing as saying it's issued by the university. But be aware of things like institutional policy. And think about the wider context. And in the kind of broader scale of things, you can think about how you're going to integrate this with employers, and work-based learning, peer learning, other universities, students doing learning from open educational resources and MOOCs and resources on the web. And all of those things have potential to be part of this this framework of badge allocation. So I think that was it. The last thing I wanted to mention, badges.toolsites.com. This is it's a MOOC, but in the sense of MOOC has M-O-C for community, not C for course. So there was a question earlier about whether the C had to be course. I don't think it does in this sense. What this is an open course that contains a lot of resources around what badges are, around designing your own badge ecosystem, and all of those things are publicly available on course sites. You can sign up for the course, or you can, if you want to, just download the whole thing as a reusable resource, remix it, and use it in your own ways at your own institutions. So I would encourage you to check that out. Okay, that's it. Questions?